You don't belong here. That's what my sister-in-law said to me. Not whispered, not implied. Said, loud enough that the three women standing beside her all turned to look at me at the same time, their champagne flutes frozen halfway to their lips. You really don't. This is a family celebration, not a charity case. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I stood there in the doorway of the private dining room my brother had reserved at the Hargrove, holding a card I'd picked out myself, wearing the blue wrap dress I'd found at a consignment shop in Buckhead for $18, and I let her words land exactly where she intended them to land. Then I looked at my watch. It was 7:14 p.m. I told myself that by 7:30, this dinner would be over in a way none of them would ever forget. But before I tell you how I ended my brother's engagement dinner in 16 minutes using nothing but my phone and a lease agreement, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I want to see how far this reaches. Her name was Courtney. She had the kind of highlights that cost $400 every 6 weeks, and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She'd been with my brother for 2 years. In that time, she had never once called me by my first name. It was always your sister when she talked to my brother, and nothing at all when she talked to me, because she rarely did. My brother. I'll call him by what he is, which is the golden child, the one my parents mortgaged their pride on. He stood at the head of the long table laughing at something her father had just said. He saw me come in. I know he did because we made eye contact for exactly 2 seconds before he looked back at her father and laughed again. I found a chair near the end of the table, away from the centerpiece, away from the window overlooking the city. I set my card down and folded my hands in my lap. Courtney hadn't finished. She crossed the room toward me with that walk she had, the one that said she'd practiced being important for a long time. She sat down in the chair next to mine, which surprised me, and she leaned in close enough that I could smell her perfume. Something expensive and floral, and she said very quietly that my brother had told her I'd been struggling, that he'd mentioned the job situation. The apartment. She tilted her head like she was genuinely concerned and said she thought it was so brave of me to still come out tonight, given everything. I smiled at her. I said I appreciated that. She patted my hand once, the way you pat the hand of someone you've already dismissed, and stood up and walked back to my brother's side. And I watched her loop her arm through his and whisper something in his ear, and I watched him glance back at me, and I saw it just for a second. The flicker of embarrassment. Not for what she'd said. For me. That was the moment I stopped feeling sad. The thing about being the one your family writes off is that it doesn't happen all at once. It's not a single conversation or a single cruelty. It's 100 small things accumulated over years that you only see clearly when you step back and look at the full picture. I looked at my brother standing there in his custom suit, the one he texted me a photo of when he bought it, asking if I thought it made him look successful. I looked at the suit and I thought about the phone call I'd gotten from my mother 2 years ago, the one where she told me in a voice carefully stripped of emotion that my father's construction business had defaulted on its line of credit and the bank was moving to collect. She hadn't asked for my opinion. She hadn't asked what I thought. She told me what was happening and then she went quiet, and the silence between us on the phone held everything she couldn't bring herself to say directly. I transferred $43,000 to my parents' account 3 days later. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't expect anything in return. I just did it because they were my parents, and because the alternative was watching them lose the house on Cloverfield Drive where we'd all grown up, where my mother still kept my grandmother's china and the cabinet by the front door. My brother never knew where that money came from. My parents told him a distant relative had helped. A distant relative. Like I was a footnote in my own family story. I looked at the table in front of me. Crystal glasses. Linen napkins folded into swans. A bread basket with 3 kinds of rolls. My brother had reserved this room, yes. But the Hargrove itself, the restaurant, the private event space, the whole property on Peachtree Street had been purchased 14 months ago by a hospitality group called Meridian Table Partners. I am the majority stakeholder of Meridian Table Partners. I don't dress like it. I don't talk about it at family dinners. I drive a 7-year-old Civic and I buy my clothes at consignment shops. Not because I have to, but because I genuinely do not care about those things, and also because I learned very early in my life that the people who love you for your money are a specific kind of dangerous that I wanted no part of. I bought my first distressed property when I was 26, a shuttered bed and breakfast in Savannah that a bank had been trying to unload for 11 months. I paid $230,000 for it, renovated it for $60,000, and sold it 18 months later for $840,000. I took that money and I did it again, and again. And eventually I stopped selling and started holding, because the income stream was better, and because there is a specific satisfaction in owning something beautiful that you pulled back from the edge of ruin. I had not told my family any of this. I had not told them because I knew what would happen if I did. I knew my brother would start calling more often, and the calls would be friendly at first, and then they would slowly turn into conversations about opportunities, about investments he'd heard about whether I'd be interested in being a silent partner in something he was working on. I knew my mother would mention it to her friends. I knew Courtney would look at me differently, and that the different way she'd look at me would not actually be better, just repositioned. So I stayed quiet. I stayed invisible. I let them believe whatever they believed, which was that I was fine but not quite thriving, which was the version of me they were most comfortable with. Courtney tapped her glass with a fork. She stood at the head of the table, her hand resting on my brother's shoulder, and she said she wanted to share some news. She said that she and my brother had been talking and that they'd decided they wanted to do something a little different for the wedding. She said they'd originally planned to hold the reception at the Piedmont Park space they'd been looking at, but that it had fallen through, and she laughed a little when she said it, a bright, practiced laugh, and then she said, "But the good news is, we're already here, and this is the most beautiful private event space in the city, so we reached out to the venue team last week, and we got it." The table applauded. Her mother said it was perfect. My brother looked pleased and slightly relieved in the way he always looked when Courtney made a decision he'd been anxious about. I picked up my water glass and took a sip. The reservation they'd made for tonight was a standard event booking through our front-of-house coordinator. I'd seen it on the property calendar 2 weeks ago when I was reviewing Q4 projections. I had not said anything, because at that point, there had been nothing to say. They wanted to use the space for an engagement dinner. Fine. The world is full of people who use spaces I own for things I'm not invited to be part of. But they had also apparently inquired about the wedding reception, and our event director, a meticulous woman who runs our bookings with the precision of an air traffic controller, would have sent them our standard contract, which contained, as all our contracts do, our conduct and hospitality clause. Section 9, paragraph C. I know Section 9, paragraph C by heart because I wrote it. It states that Meridian Table Partners reserves the right to cancel or terminate any reservation, including mid-event, if any guest or client engages in behavior that demeans, threatens, or deliberately humiliates staff or management of the property. It also states that in such cases any deposits or fees paid are non-refundable, and the client forfeits all rights to future bookings at any Meridian property. I wrote that clause after an incident at our Decatur location 3 years ago, where a groom's father drunkenly berated our sommelier in front of 40 guests and threw a wine glass at the wall. I swore it would never happen again on my watch. It had not. Courtney, of course, had no idea I existed. She knew someone owned the building. She did not know that someone was the woman she'd just told didn't belong here. I opened the property management app on my phone under the table. I looked at tonight's event listing. I looked at the client name. I looked at the signed contract date. Then I looked at Courtney, who was now describing the floral arrangements she envisioned, gesturing with her hands, her ring catching the light. I thought about the $18 I'd spent on distress. I thought about the $43,000 I'd wired to my parents so they could sleep in a house that still had their name on the deed. I thought about the business loan I'd quietly co-signed for my brother 4 years ago when he was starting his logistics company, the one he'd paid back mostly on time, the one where the last 2 installments were still outstanding, the one where I was technically still the guarantor. I thought about all the years I had been quiet and invisible and fine but not quite thriving. I thought about what Courtney's face had looked like when she patted my hand. I stood up. It wasn't dramatic. I didn't knock anything over. I just stood up, and I walked to the front of the room, and I said, Excuse me. I'm sorry to interrupt. Courtney looked at me with the expression of someone who has just noticed a piece of furniture has started speaking. I said I just wanted to take a moment because I had some information that might be relevant to the wedding planning conversation, and I held up my phone with the property management dashboard open, and I said, I'm the owner of the Hargrove and our other 4 locations in the metro area, and I need to let you know that this event as of right now is in violation of our conduct clause. The room went very still. My brother said my name the way you say the name of someone you're afraid has lost their mind. Courtney said, I'm sorry, what? I said, Section 9, Paragraph C of the venue contract you signed covers conduct toward management and staff. When you told me I don't belong here, and when you implied in front of this table that I'm a charity case, you were speaking to the majority stakeholder of the company that owns this building. That qualifies. Her mother made a sound like a tea kettle about to go off. Courtney's face cycled through several expressions very quickly. Confusion, then dismissal, then something I recognized as the beginning of panic trying to look like anger. She said I was being ridiculous. She said this was a family dinner and she was just making conversation and I was clearly sensitive, and she looked at my brother when she said it, the way people look at someone they expect to manage a situation for them. My brother set down his fork. He said, let's all just calm down. And he said it in the voice he'd been using since we were children. The one that meant he was about to smooth something over in a way that would make me feel like the problem. I looked at him. I said, I am calm. I've been calm all evening. I swiped to the next screen on my phone and said I was pulling up the event contract, and I read Section 9 aloud, the whole paragraph, in the same voice I use in board meetings, even and clear. And when I finished, I said that because of this violation I was exercising our right to cancel tonight's event and any associated future bookings, including the wedding reception inquiry that had been submitted last week. Her father stood up. He was a large man with the bearing of someone who had spent his career being the biggest person in any room he walked into, and he said, now listen here, and he said some things about lawyers and contracts and whether I understood who he was and what he was capable of. I let him finish. Then I said that our legal team was available Monday through Friday 9 to 5 and that he was welcome to reach out, and I gave him the name of our general counsel, and I said that in the meantime the event tonight was concluded, and that our staff would be happy to bring boxes for any personal items, and that the room would need to be cleared in the next 15 minutes. He sat back down. I don't know why. I think it was the specific calm of it. Loud anger is something people know how to fight. Quiet certainty is harder to argue with. Courtney found her voice again. She said she didn't believe me. She said anyone could pull up a random app and claim anything. She said my brother had told her about me, that I'd been going through a hard time, that I wasn't always stable. And the way she said it, careful and clinical, like she was concerned, made every hair on the back of my neck stand up. That's the move, isn't it? When they can't argue the facts, they argue your sanity. My brother didn't say anything. He was looking at the tablecloth. I walked to the small credenza along the wall where the venue's hospitality binder was kept. It was kept there for all private events, standard practice. Inside was a welcome letter on Meridian Table Partners letterhead with my name on it, my full name, my title, my signature. I took it out and I held it up and I said, this is the welcome letter every client receives when they book this space. You received this 2 weeks ago. Courtney's mother had gotten very quiet. She picked up the binder letter her daughter had apparently not read closely enough, and she looked at it, and she looked at me, and something in her face changed. Courtney looked at my brother. My brother finally looked up from the tablecloth, and I watched something happen in his face that I had never seen there before in 32 years of being his sister. I watched him understand something. Not just about tonight, about years. He said my name again, differently this time. I said I knew he hadn't known. I said our parents had kept it from him the same way they'd kept other things from him, and that was a conversation he should have with them, not with me. Not tonight. He asked about the loan, the cosign. I said it was still there. I said I hadn't called it in, and I wasn't planning to, but that I needed him to understand that it existed, and that I had chosen, repeatedly, to be invisible and to protect this family from a distance, and that I had done that out of love, and I didn't regret it. But I was done doing it while being told I didn't belong in the rooms. My own money helped keep warm. The room was completely silent. Courtney sat down. Not dramatically. She just sat down, like the air had gone out of her. Her father looked at his phone. I think he was Googling Meridian table partners. I picked up my card from the end of the table, the one I'd brought for my brother. I carried it to where he was sitting and I set it down in front of him. I said I hoped he'd have a good wedding. I said I genuinely meant that. I said the Hargrove team would honor any deposits already paid and apply them to a different date if they wanted to rebook, but that the booking would need to go through our standard process, same as anyone else, and that the conduct clause applied to all future events without exception. I put my phone in my purse. I said goodnight to the table, and I walked out. The drive home took 22 minutes. I got back to my apartment, the one I own, the one I've lived in for 4 years, the one with the good light in the kitchen that I chose specifically because of the good light in the kitchen. And I changed out of the $18 dress and I made myself a cup of tea and I sat by the window for a long time. My brother called at 9:47. I didn't answer. He called again at 10:15. I didn't answer that one either. He texted at 10:30. It said, I didn't know. I'm sorry. Can we talk? I read it twice. I set my phone face down on the counter. I picked up my tea. I thought about what it cost to be invisible for a long time to protect people who never thought to look for you. I thought about the year I ate rice and beans 4 nights a week and told everyone I was on a health kick. I thought about the $43,000 that saved a house no one thanked me for saving. I thought about all the rooms I had quietly funded and then stood in the corner of, trying to take up as little space as possible. I thought about Courtney's face when she read the letterhead. I thought about my father's construction business, which was still operating, which I had also quietly helped refinance 18 months ago through a small business credit line I guaranteed through one of my LLCs, which he also didn't know was me. I have a meeting Tuesday with our expansion team. We're looking at 2 properties in Charlotte and 1 in Nashville. The Nashville one needs significant work. The bones are good, the roof is not, but I've seen worse and the neighborhood is exactly where I'd want it to be in 5 years. I replied to my brother's text at 11:02. I said, I know you're sorry. I believe you. But sorry is a starting point, not a destination. Call me when you're ready to have a real conversation, not just a hard one. I set my phone down again. I finished my tea. The thing about being underestimated your whole life is that it gives you a very long runway to build on. Nobody is watching you when they think you're nothing. Nobody is tracking your accounts or questioning your decisions or calling in favors when they think you're just the sister who's going through a hard time. They leave you alone. And alone, with enough patience and enough hunger and enough cold nights eating cheap food while you wire your savings to people who will never quite see you clearly, you can build something that surprises everyone, especially yourself. The debt my family owes me isn't financial. I don't need the money back. What I needed, what I'd been waiting for without fully knowing it, was for someone in that room to finally see me. Not the version of me they'd invented to make themselves comfortable. Me. I think my brother saw me tonight. I don't know what he'll do with that. I don't know if Courtney will be someone I can ever sit across a table from without remembering the way she patted my hand, like I was something to be managed. But I know this. The next time someone tells me I don't belong somewhere, I'll remember what it felt like to hold the deed to the room they set it in. And I'll smile exactly the same way I smiled at Courtney. And I'll check my watch. There is something I keep coming back to, sitting in my kitchen with the tea gone cold and my phone face down on the counter. It's not the look on Courtney's face when she read the letterhead. It's not her father standing up and then sitting back down. It's the 2 seconds my brother and I made eye contact when I walked through that door and the way he looked away. That's the moment I want to understand, because I think that's where everything actually lives. I spent a long time believing that if I stayed quiet enough, gave enough, made myself small enough, the people I loved would eventually see me clearly. That's not how it works. I know that now. What I know is that people see what they expect to see. And if you never challenge the expectation, it calcifies into fact. My family expected me to be the one who was fine but struggling, and so that is what I became in their eyes, no matter what I was actually building in the background. What Courtney did that night wasn't unusual. It was just honest. She did what a lot of people do. She looked at the surface of a thing and decided she understood it completely. The $18 dress. The quiet demeanor. The absence of any obvious markers of status. She ran the numbers and concluded I was safe to dismiss. That's not cruelty exactly. It's laziness. It's the refusal to look closer, to ask questions, to consider that the person in front of you might have a whole interior life you haven't accounted for. I've been thinking about what it actually took to get to that room. Not the money, not the properties. The decisions. The night I transferred $43,000 to my parents and then went back to eating rice and beans and didn't tell a single person. The year I drove a car with a cracked dashboard because I was reinvesting everything I had. The 100 small moments where I chose the longer, harder, less visible path because I believed it was right, not because anyone was watching. That's the thing about integrity. And I mean the real kind, not the performed kind. It doesn't require an audience. It just requires that you keep making the same choice over and over in the dark, when no one will ever know whether you did or didn't. I made that choice so many times, it stopped feeling like a choice and started feeling like just who I was. And the intelligence it took, not the kind that scores well on tests, but the kind that reads a room, understands systems, sees around corners, that didn't come from a classroom. It came from paying attention, from watching how money moved, how leverage worked, how distressed things could be made whole again with patience and the right kind of stubbornness. I learned more from one failing property than I did from any course I ever took. But none of it would have mattered without the third thing, which is just the willingness to keep going when keeping going made no obvious sense. There were years where I was tired in a way I couldn't explain to anyone, where the gap between what I was building and what my family believed about me felt like a weight I carried alone. I kept going anyway, not because I was fearless, because I had decided that the alternative, shrinking to fit their expectations, was the one thing I genuinely could not survive. My brother texted me again this morning. He asked if we could have lunch. I told him yes, but not yet. I need a little more time with the quiet. That's allowed. You're allowed to take your time rebuilding something, even when the thing you're rebuilding is a relationship with someone you've loved your whole life. Maybe especially then. What happened at the Hargrove wasn't about revenge. I want to be clear about that, at least to myself. It was about finally taking up the space I had already earned. It was about stopping the performance of smallness that I had been running for so long I'd almost forgotten it was a performance. I don't need them to applaud me. I just needed them to see me. And now they do.